What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. In this video, we're going to check out the new features contained in SketchUp 2025. Stick around to the end of the video and I'll give you kind of my feel for how I feel about these new additions and the direction of SketchUp in general. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so the first new feature, and probably the highlight feature of this new release, is the photoreal rendering that they've added in here. And so what that is if you toggle over into the display photoreal materials style right here, so it's a style at the top of your page. You can right click and go into styles as well. Notice how this changes the background of your model, and it also changes the way your model looks. So you can really kind of see this in this view. Notice how you're starting to get reflections off of that background right here. So what SketchUp has done, first off, is added an environment over here on the right hand side of your page. So an environment is going to basically be an HDRI image with lighting associated with it that you can use in order to light your scene. And so notice how as I adjust this right here, it's adjusting the scene, but we're still getting reflections based on that environment. So we now have HDRI environments in SketchUp that affect the lighting. And so those environments are going to affect reflections and everything else. Now there's some built in, right? So you can kind of pick between some of these built-in environments. You can also download and install your own if you want to do that. But notice how each one of them affects the lighting differently, right? But you're getting reflections in here. Your metal objects are reflecting. So it gives you this kind of like this rendered look inside of SketchUp. And so this is going to use that environment to light your scene. Notice how there's an option for set sun location in those settings. That set sun location is going to find the brightest point in your scene. And I love the way this is adjustable, right? If you want to like cheat a little bit to get some better shadows, you can do that. So it's actually a really intuitive way to set the physical sun location. But notice how when you do that inside of your shadow settings, this is now locked. So you can either uncheck this and you can manually set up your shadows and your sun location like this. Or, and this is really what you're going to want, is you're going to want to lock this to your sun location inside of the 3D space. Now, you can also download your own HDRI environments. So for example, say that we just bring in this HDRI image that I brought from, I think this one is from Polyhaven, but notice how I can bring in my own backgrounds as well in order to set up different kinds of lighting in this scene. So that's super cool. I'm super excited to see what people are going to be able to do with this. Where I'm really fascinated with this, by the way, is the possibility of combining this with SketchUp styles. So notice how your styles still show up in here. So you can adjust things like your profiles if you want those to be thicker. You can also add your ambient occlusion to faces right here. I personally don't feel like this is a replacement for something like a D5 or a Twinmotion or something like that. I think this is something that allows you to really quickly create these quick renderings in here in a different style than we've seen before. So one quick note about this isn't especially great right now for creating interior renderings, right? So even if you use like a studio environment or something like that, so say we were to pick, I guess there aren't any built-in studio environments, but notice how your lighting is 100% driven by what's outside of the building. And right now your reflections are shining through the building right here, right? So the way these reflect, this is something that you can't, that at the moment you get like weird reflections because the reflections don't pick up on things like model geometry. Now, this is something that happens across most rendering programs, which is why you have to add like reflection probes and things like that and things like Twinmotion are you used to in order to get this to kind of like occlude out of here. So there's also no artificial lights at the moment. So primarily for me, unless you're doing something where you're getting kind of reflections off of the exterior like this is really more of an exterior tool rather than an interior tool. So that is something that I'm hoping they'll add in the future is like interior artificial light sources. But right now everything is driven off those HDRI environments. And so to go along with the environments, we also have the ability to add PBR materials to surfaces. So let's go ahead and let's toggle this on in a fresh model right here. Notice your materials section has changed in SketchUp. Now I was hoping the Mac materials section would get adjusted to match the PC version, but that still doesn't seem to be the case. So your Mac is going to look a little bit different, but notice how now the way that you preview materials looks different. I'm hoping they'll add some more preview setups in the future, but right now what we're going to do is we're going to add a few materials. So we'll add maybe a brick material like this one. Notice how these library materials are different than the ones that we've had in the past. But if we bring some of these in, and let's pick maybe like a ground cover, something like this right here. And so another thing that you're going to notice in here, and you probably want to rotate this so that the bright part of the scene is up here. But notice how with these different materials, we now have the ability to upload different PBR maps, and you can also adjust things about different materials. Now, this is one thing that I would like to see added or adjusted to in the future, is sometimes your PBR materials can look a little bit plasticky in here when you apply the normal maps. But say that we go in here and we adjust this, notice how this has a normal map applied, and you can adjust the strength of that normal right here. You can also flip the normals like this, but those different PBR maps are going to make a huge difference in the way that different materials look, right? So let's say, for example, that we were to select this material right here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to do an edit, and we're going to bump that normal up. And again, notice how they do have a tendency to look a little bit plasticky depending on how you do this. Usually you're going to want to crank your roughness all the way up, and sometimes toggling it off can help as well. But notice how you can make materials look bumpy in your renderings using different maps. You can download materials from places like Polyhaven or other places like that in order to create your own PBR materials, but having the ability to adjust these different maps is actually super powerful. So again, notice how you can use the ambient occlusion to highlight some of your shadows in here, and then you can use the normals to highlight the bumpiness of different materials. So we'll get more into this in a future video, but the PBR maps function is actually a really great function. Now, one thing I did want to highlight is they've also added additional collections of materials that you can download from the 3D warehouse. So if you click on this button right here to launch the 3D warehouse, notice how that's going to take you to their materials library. And right now they have different collections of different things. So things like stone, other things like that. So you can either bring in individual materials. And so if we click on the download button right here, what that's going to do is that's going to bring that in to your in model section. And so that's going to bring in that material, and you can apply it to a surface just like this. So you can go download those different materials right here. You can also download the entire wood collection, for example, by clicking on yes. Notice how that's going to take a while right here. And so when we download that, notice how all of those now show up in your in model section right here. So you can pick between them. So like all of these wood materials, for example, were now added. These are all available in the 3D warehouse, which I think is super exciting because you've got a ton of woods in here. This one actually looks really good with the reflections. So I do think your results are going to vary a little bit depending on the materials that you bring in. But overall, I'm super excited to see what people are going to create with this. Okay, so one thing you are going to get a lot more is when you try to do like a new file or you try to like save a file, you're going to get this little pop-up that asks if you want to purge unused. That's actually going to get really important because as you start bringing in your own custom HDRI images and PBR materials, your models could get really bloated. So you're going to want to do a bunch of purging when you're not actually using things that are in these libraries. Now, note that when you do this, if you purge this and these materials aren't in use, they're going to get removed from your in model section. It'll make your model smaller, but it'll also remove some of the ones that you've downloaded from the 3D warehouse. So there's kind of this like give and take in here. Generally, I'm on the side of you're going to want to purge a lot. And if you really want to save these materials, you can save them to a custom collection, which you can then open later. Okay, so another cool feature that I wanted to highlight is notice how sometimes you get things like this 3D warehouse model where you've got like tiling textures, or you might have brought them in from like images or something like that. You can sample that material. Well, we don't have PBR maps for this material, and this is also tiling. Well, you might have noticed there's this little button right here for use AI to generate photoreal textures. What that is going to do is that's going to go through with this selected material, and it's going to try to A, make it seamless, and B, generate these maps down here based on your image. So if you click on this, watch this material tiling. What it's going to do is it's going to try to make it a seamless material. Now, when I've tested this, it's varied a little bit in the results that it's created, but it's still super cool. Like, notice how there's no more tiling associated with this, and you now have a normal map and an ambient occlusion map. Now, one thing I have asked for, and hopefully we see at some point, is the ability to actually, like, because at the moment I don't think we have the ability to do that, but notice how this has added those PBR maps to this material just like this. So it's done that just using this image right here. So you can use it in order to fix tiling issues and generate PBR maps automatically in your model, which I think is a great feature. Okay, next up is a feature that I think a ton of people are going to be really excited about. There's a new extension in the extension warehouse for migrating extensions. So if you go into the 3D warehouse, it's not, or the extension warehouse, it's not showing up down here right now. But if you look for extension Migrator right here, there's now a new tool for migrating your extensions from the old version to the new version. So what you need to do is you need to install this extension in SketchUp. We're going to say yes right here. And what this is going to do is you can run this, and it's going to ask if you want to migrate your extensions from an older SketchUp installation. I'm going to say yes. And so I'm going to pick SketchUp 2024 from my list, click on next, and it's going to ask me which extensions I want to bring over. Now, note that this is only a list of the extensions that you have active in that version, right? Because I have a lot more extensions in this, but I unloaded them using the Sketchucation plugin manager. So this isn't showing everything that's in here, but everything that's loaded is going to show up on this list. So if I click on the button for migrate, what it's going to do is it's going to take all of those Ruby script files, it's going to migrate them over into this new version of SketchUp. So it's going to go through and it's going to do all of this automatically, which is super exciting because you used to have to do this manually. Now it's going to ask you to restart SketchUp. And notice how all those extensions now show up inside of SketchUp right here. So that extension migrator is a massive time saver when it comes to bringing over your extensions from SketchUp 2024 to SketchUp 2025. Okay, so another feature that I think people are going to find extremely useful, because it's been something that's been a little bit frustrating in the past, is say that, for example, I was to come in here, this is a kitchen model that's going to be an example model that's going to be available in my course. But let's say that we were to add a whole bunch of indicators in here. And I'll speed this video up so you don't have to watch me do this. Okay, so let's say we added a bunch of indicators and we wanted these to be, I'm just going to call it indicators right here. And I want them to be on a dotted layer right here. So we've got this in here and it's cool because we can toggle it on and off, right? But the problem is this now shows up in like every single view that we have. Well, the cool thing about this is if you have a scene where you don't want them to show up in, like say I don't want this to show up in any of my perspective or parallel projections, you can actually select those in your scene manager by doing a shift click. You can right click and you can click on apply tags to scenes. And what that's going to do is that's going to go through and that's going to apply this tag being off to all of those scenes, right? So now if I click between these, like this, it toggled those off in all of the scenes that I had selected. And so you can use this in order to toggle different tags off in multiple different scenes, which has been a feature that's been requested for a very long time. Okay, so another feature they've added, which I think makes a ton of sense, is it's always been weird because you can use the move tool and it's going to show these little crosses in here like this, but previously the rotate tool didn't show those. Well, now when you have the rotate tool active, the little crosses are going to show up as well on the different faces so that you can rotate this object. So that's something that seems silly, but it's something that makes a ton of sense and probably should have been done a while ago. Okay, so another cool function, which I also really like, is say that you use arcs on surfaces. Right here, it now has the ability to inference, or what it's going to do is it's going to indicate to you that tangent function that's in here. So say that I draw one corner like this and I double click. Remember that that's going to basically round off that corner. Well, now if I mouse over this, notice how it's going to give me the ability to double click and do that same thing to other corners as well, like this. So now it's adding that same tangent curve around all of these so they have the exact same curves. The other cool thing about this is notice how when I mouse over this face, I can also take that back by double clicking. So if you put this in here on some curves that you didn't want, you can double click in order to remove that tangent arc around the corner, which is super cool. So I like that feature a lot. So they've also added the ability to do kind of like a parallel snap to objects. So if I right click and I add snaps right here, which again, I think snaps are a feature that probably I should be using more. I think other people probably should be as well. But when you add that snap right here, notice how it'll give you kind of like this diagonal lock, and you can just double click in order to place this like this. So that gives you these snaps at kind of an angle right here. So you can put it on all of the different points like this. But then if you take this object, you make a copy, right? So I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode. And I've got these snaps in here. You can snap to those corners. So another feature that I wasn't using a ton, but you can use the text tool in order to label things like dimensions in your scene. Well, notice how those are now going to update dynamically as you update objects. So if you do want kind of an indicator that's showing what the area of a surface is or something like that, the dynamic or the text tool is now going to dynamically update based on that in your scene like this. My understanding is you can also add additional label. So for example, red floor, and then as long as you have the open and closed brackets right here, that's still going to work as well. So you can put kind of a dynamically updating note on here, which I guess is pretty cool for quick labeling. Okay, so now let's hop over into layout. There's a couple things that have been changed over there. So first off, you can control your rendering settings over there. So by going into the effects on the right-hand side right here, you can adjust if the ambient occlusion is going to show up in here. Notice how there's a distance slider and an intensity slider in here like this. It's going to affect the way that ambient occlusion looks in your scene. Obviously, I've cranked it up a little high, but you can control that in your scene effects if you need to do that. I prefer to manage that in SketchUp, but you can do that over here. You can also change the environment for your rendered view inside of layout as well. So if you want to have like a different environment in your scene, you can do that inside of layout, but those rendered looks are going to now show up in layout. And so what I'm really interested about is the ability to combine the rendered views with the non-rendered views inside a layout. I think that's going to allow people to create really cool results that they couldn't create in the past. I mean, this is just something that I did really quickly, but I think being able to combine between the two is going to be super interesting. Okay, so one feature that I'm really glad they finally added is you can use the move function in layout like you can inside of SketchUp. So in addition to being able to click and drag still, you can mouse over a point, single click, move your mouse, and then inference to another point. That is something where personally, I was not a massive fan of the way that you could move things around previously. So having a move or click, move, click functionality is actually a huge deal to me. So in addition, they've also changed the rotate tool so that it also works kind of like the rotate tool in SketchUp. So you can set a base point and then rotate an object like this based on a number of degrees, which again, and you can, I believe you can tap the control key in order to go to copy mode. I don't think, oh no, that's good too. So in addition, you've also got the ability to do arrays in here using the rotate tool, which I am massively excited about. So that's really cool as well. They've also changed the scale function so that you can set between 2 points. And so then what you can do, right, is you can set a base point. So I can activate the scale tool, set that base point right here. These grips need to move outside of the edges, I think, in my opinion. But if I single click and then move my mouse and click again, I can use this in order to scale an object based on what I want right here. So that's something that being able to actually scale using points is another super valuable function within layout itself. Now, they have also made improvements to the join and split functions, which I never really used all that much to begin with, but you can use those to join multiple objects and edges at once. So that's pretty cool. You can also use it to split multiple different things at once inside of your model. But now you can take all of these and you can join them together using the join function right here into a singular object. And so they've added a tool for a zoom window. So if you tap the Z key, you can click and drag in order to set this. Note the placement point on that magnifying glass is right in the middle of the magnifying glass. And then if you double tap the P key, you can go back to your overall plan view. But you can use this in order to quickly zoom in to locations. And then finally, one feature that I really like is they also added the ability to select multiple different things over in your pages section. You can right click and you can click on export, and that's going to allow you to export those pages, just the ones that you have selected, directly out of layout. Okay, so overall thoughts on this release. I like what they're adding here, and I like the direction that they're going. So the rendering, for example, I mean, obviously some of the problems that have been there forever with all sorts of rendering engines, so things like the reflections of the model walls and stuff like that without having a path tracer, are things that are probably going to have to be figured out, or maybe not. I mean, this may be something that allows you to create kind of lightweight, stylized renders. Then if you need something more than that, you move into like a Twinmotion or a D5 or something like that. I would like to see this set up where when you set up those maps, they transfer over into the different software so that you're not doing that multiple different times. I think that could be a really cool feature. I'd also like to see some artificial lights in there so that you can do interior renders, because to me, it's not really an interior rendering tool right now, but I think it's really exciting. I think where SketchUp can kind of differentiate here is having the ability to combine styles. And I'd love to see some like expansions of styles functionality. But I think being able to combine kind of like the lightweight render with the stylized stuff is actually going to be a huge differentiator for SketchUp if they go that direction. I think styles is something they should focus on, as it's a lot easier to create stylized stuff in SketchUp than most other programs, at least in my opinion. So other thoughts based on my testing so far, the AI features are kind of hit or miss, but that's kind of how AI features are in general. So when it works, it's super cool. I'd like to see a little bit more control of the PBR maps that are created. Like I'd like to be able to download those and post-process them in something like a Photoshop or something like that when it generates those materials. So I'd like to be able to download those maps. The other thing is this is a little light on modeling features. And I've talked about this before. I would like to see more focus on adding modeling features. So everything from like bevels to like polyline tools and things like that. So that's something I'm not really seeing in this release. It's something I'm hopeful that SketchUp's going to focus on more in the future, because I think it's something that can really help the program get more competitive. But overall, I like this movement. I mean, this is a huge feature add for SketchUp, and I like where this could go. So I'm excited to see some development happening over there, and I'm excited to see where it's going to go in the future. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think about this new release? As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.